Heroes of Newerth is a MOBA developed by S2 Games and later Frostburn Studios, which entered its beta stage in April 2009. It came to be in a unique time period where Dota All-Stars was at an all-time popularity, but the limitations of the Warcraft 3 engine prevented much of what the game could have been. And so, after partnering with IceFrog, Han was meant to be a spiritual successor and effective sequel to the original Dota, as it ported over plenty of one-to-one copies of everyone's favorite characters. Although it hasn't quite stood the test of time, especially with the emergence of League of Legends by Riot Games, and later Dota 2 by Valve Software, Newerth holds a special place in many players' hearts for being a much faster-paced version of Dota All-Stars, and bringing to the table a ton of memorable hero concepts. With June 20th, 2022 being the last official day that Han servers will stay up, please join me as we remember the heroes of Newerth. This funny looking fella is Electrician, who's also one of the first original heroes from Newerth. He's a melee strength hero who's great at ganking and being the focal point of team fights where he can soak up a hefty amount of damage while sapping enemies of their mana, movement speed, and buffs. Visually, he's a goblin disfigured by the steampunk appendages attached throughout his body, making him look gruesome and intimidating in the process. As he's a generic character, and not necessarily a unique person in the world of Newerth, his lore says how the finest Legion spies learned mere months ago of a mad archaeologist whose unnatural thirst for knowledge led him into a forbidden pact with the Hellborn. His discoveries have been used to forge shock troopers, men fused with ancient technology, pulsing with violent energy. These horrifying hybrids bear a tank of liquid lightning upon their backs, and they wield its contents as both sword and shield. His voice lines are your typical pun-filled affair, with a somewhat ratty delivery, backed up with an electric filter.
Shock and awe! I bring with me an electric storm! I'm gonna let him up! I have an electric personality! No more juice!
Electrician's first spell is Static Grip. This targets a single enemy and forms a link with them, dealing 60 magic damage per second and stunning them for up to 3 seconds. While casting the spell, Electrician is able to move around and act freely, but it will break if Electrician becomes stunned, silenced, or moves 700 distance away from his victim. This is one of those simple yet effective abilities that can set up for kills or disrupt any channeling spells. With its above average disable duration, you're more than likely to get a free pickoff if you catch a foe unaware. Next, we have Electric Shield. When activated, this drains up to 20% of your max mana and creates a shield which absorbs 50% of incoming damage for 12 seconds, with the shield's health equal to 1.2 times the mana spent. A bit of a doozy to comprehend, but in short, the more mana you use, the bigger the shield you create. Additionally, while the shield is active, it applies electric aura to enemies in a 300 radius, which deals 60 magic damage per second. An interesting take on the mana shield mechanic, this utilizes your huge mana pool to protect yourself, but only for a short duration. It only has a 0.5 second cooldown, so you can keep it up as long as you have the mana to spend on it. The extra little bit of damage it gives off also adds to Electrician's offensive potential, as you can easily chip away at a target you've immobilized with your Static Grip. With the Staff of the Masters, this turns Electric Shield into a toggle ability, so you don't need to spend the mana to turn it on, and it drains your mana as you take damage. You would basically have Medusa's mana shield at this point. The big plus side to this is that Electric Shield will stay on even if the hero's mana pool goes to 0, so you can still deal magic damage per second in a radius around you. After this, we have Energy Absorption. This is a small AoE ability that deals magic damage to all enemies around Electrician, while also removing 14% of their max mana. On top of this, he gains some movement speed and restores mana for each enemy that he hits. Energy Absorption provides a lot of utility for the hero, really everything that he needs to maximize how annoying he is. Realistically, you're using it to mostly restore your mana to keep that nasty shield up, but the extra bit of movement speed is always useful to maneuver around the map, whether you're using it to catch up to an enemy or run away from a gank. Electrician's ultimate is Cleansing Shock. This is a single target ability that shocks a unit, purging debuffs and increasing movement speed if the target is an ally, or removing buffs and increasing movement speed if it's an enemy. At max level, the cooldown goes down to 9 seconds, and the shock also chains to additional nearby targets based on its level, up to 2 at its max. Despite not being super flashy or dealing any damage, Electrician's ultimate is devastating when used correctly. You can essentially keep an enemy in place with Cleansing Shock and Static Grip, or you can juke everyone on the battlefield by shocking yourself and using Energy Absorption to push it even further. To make things even better, Staff of the Masters will also upgrade the spell in addition to Electric Shield. This makes it so that if you target an enemy, an allied instance of the spell will also happen around the target, giving all the aforementioned buffs to your friends. And the opposite is true as well. So if you target an ally, all enemies nearby will be purged and have their movement speed slowed. With this, I think Electrician's kit really comes together, and his combination of crowd control, tankiness, utility, and overall presence is too much to ignore. Okay, so despite having spells that sound pretty broken on paper, Electrician's stat growth isn't anything to brag about. His intelligence gain is fairly low, and that's not what you want for a hero who utilizes his mana pool as a second bar of health. For these reasons, picking up Steam Boots or Sorcery Boots, as well as Barbed Armor, is a good start no matter which build you're going for. With a little more farm, a Nullstone is a good combination of stats and protection, as you'll certainly be a big target once you static grip someone. For a more defensive build, Barrier Idol and a Frostfield Plate provide a decent amount of stats as well as protection from both magic and physical damage against the enemy team, while a more offense build can utilize a Bloodborne Maul to really rack up the damage over a prolonged fight, and even a Mock of Brilliance if you want to stack up that AoE damage over time. You'll typically want to put a point into static grip early just for the disable, but your priority should be to max energy absorption as it'll be your main farming tool, and you can sustain your mana more easily in the laning phase, followed by maxing out Electric Shield to get some tankiness for teamfights. Back in my day, Electrician was the biggest nuisance in the world if you didn't know how to deal with him. His shield made him unkillable, and his ultimate was a certified mark of death, especially if you were a support hero. Not only that, but his static grip originally held you down for 4.75 seconds, and acted similarly to Rasta's Shackles ability. So as long as he had any kind of backup, he'd be able to pick off anyone with ease. I don't know about you, but I think his crimes are severe enough to put him away for assault and battery. From an immovable wall to an unstoppable force, here's the Madman. Also a part of the original cast like Electrician, he's a melee agility hero who focuses entirely on attacking as much as humanly possible while having incredible mobility. Despite the name, he's no Don Draper. He takes the form of a hunched over humanoid figure with green skin and wild red hair, adorning a mask and massive claws on his arms. His lore doesn't give us much information to go on, mostly theorizing who or what the Madman is. No one knows for certain the identity of this masked and demented murderer. Some say he was confined for eons in the deepest pit of hell, a villain so black at heart that even the Hellborn treated him as a pariah, yet so deadly that they were forced to call upon him in their war with the Legion. Others say he is a man, just a man, but driven mad by the endless carnage he has witnessed. Now, given what I've just read, I bet you have an idea of what this guy might sound like. Let me be the one to tell you that whatever it is you're thinking of, you're wrong. Madman just sounds like a normal guy with an echoey filter over his voice, and I gotta say, he doesn't live up to his story.
Shred them to pieces! Murder! Death! Kill! They'll see what lies behind this mask. Fine, just hurry up! To the killing fields!
Moving on to his spells now, Madman's Q is Stalk. This is an active that turns him invisible for a short time, grants him drastically increased movement speed, and he'll deal magic damage to any enemy unit he passes through. Based on the description, I would say this is a port of Weaver's Shikuchi, and it's meant for the Madman to get around, either positioning himself to take out his prey, or to go from one farming spot to the next. Following this is Barrel Roll. This is a target point ability that has the Madman lunging forward and then rolling back to his original position rapidly. Enemies who are caught in the path are slowed by 50% for 3.5 seconds. Definitely more of a setup spell than anything, this allows the Madman to gain the upper hand on his target, as he's able to follow up with a barrage of attacks thereafter. The damage it deals is also pretty nice, so it's good in the early game for harass, but the true value really comes around once his auto attacks gain a little more oomph. Madman's third spell is Gash. This is a passive that allows Madman to deal extra percentage damage per stack on an enemy on non-DOT attacks, stacking up to 6 times on the same enemy. With more levels into Gash, his other 2 basic spells allow him to amplify his DPS on a single unit. It's pretty straightforward to understand, but I really think you'll come to appreciate it once you hear about his ultimate, Berserk. This is a self buff that grants the Madman a huge burst of attack speed, up to an extra 160 for 30 seconds. Ignoring the fact that 30 seconds is a crazy long time for a steroid of this caliber, this spell is what allows the Madman to dish out a ton of damage, but it does require him to farm up the right items in order to be useful. Berserk makes him one of the hardest carries available in the game, And for added chaos, a Staff of the Masters will upgrade this to Insanity, which calls upon the spirit of Shaun T to add an effect where upon taking lethal damage, Madman will delay his death for 4 seconds, and every kill he gets during this time will delay it by an additional 4 seconds. One of those last-ditch effort kind of abilities, this makes it so that even if you die to the enemy team, they still gotta worry about you, and given that most people blow all their best spells immediately to take out the carry, this small window of opportunity may be enough to turn a fight around in your team's favor. The Madman is an easy to understand hero, but it takes a lot of game sense in order to, well, not die. He's absurdly weak without items, and it's not too difficult to pick him off, especially given his low base health and strength growth. So because of this, Shrunken Head is a no-brainer for the health and magic community. An Elder Parasite or Whispering Helm might be a good pickup as well to sustain yourself while farming in the jungle. After this, you're pretty much focusing on on-hit effects such as Brutalizer for the stun, Savage Mace for the DPS, or even Frostwolf Skull to keep your target permaslowed. As far as skills go, you pretty much want to max out stock and barrel roll first, since Gash won't do too much in the early game. It's an effortless skill build for sure, but it's up to the individual player to make the most of farming the map to get to the late game. Madman really is one of those newbie bait heroes. He attacks really fast, and that understandably attracts newer players. I've fallen into the trap myself where I focused so much on the damage potential that I never bought any defensive items, and guess what? I died all the time when I played him. But I'd be lying if I said it wasn't fun. So let this be a lesson to all of you. You have to survive if you want to be a madman. Otherwise, you'll get nuked so hard that you'll become a sad man. From a madman to a mad fish, here's Myrmidon. Introduced in version 1.0.21, roughly in December 2010, Myrmidon is a ranged intelligence hero who's a buff fish person, with a body resembling that of a Naga or Lamia. And yes, okay, feel free to call him a Slardar ripoff. I already sensed it the second he showed up on screen. Now, Myrmidon is unique in the sense that he started off as a Legion hero, but switched over to the Hellborn side in version 2.0.16. And instead of copy-pasting the description, they wrote an entirely new one for him. So, he's got 2 different backstories. The first one even acknowledges his wavering loyalty. A denizen of Newerth's uncharted depths, Myrmidon has arisen to check the Hellborn advance before it reaches his beloved seas. Like the ocean whose form he can take on, Myrmidon is powerful, fickle, and at times, even cruel. With his ability to transform into a monster of terrifying strength and power, some question where his loyalties truly lie, but his might is certainly a welcome aid to the Legion in the war against the Daemons. And in his updated Hellborn lore, Myrmidon's allegiance to the Legion was always tenuous at best. The Sharkman's joy in the carnage of combat left many suspicious. It was not until a Legion sorcerer uncovered that Myrmidon was himself a member of a shadowy race of deep-sea daemons that true panic set in, but by then, it was too late. A trail of blood and devastation marked Myrmidon's escape to the ranks of the Hellborn. Now wielding the destructive might of a tsunami, he wreaks havoc among those who once claimed him as an ally. His allegiance change should come as no surprise once you listen to his voice lines. He sounds so generically evil that the Legion should have washed their backs ahead of time so that Myrmidon could stab it more cleanly.
Direct my waves, so come to the depths. I have a bubbly personality.
The first of Myrmidon's skills is Weed Field. This creates a line of seaweed straight out from where Myrmidon is standing. After a 1-second delay, the field will erupt, dealing damage and stunning enemies caught in the AoE. In a very general sense, this is a great area denial spell, greatly limiting the movement of your opponents. It's identical to Jakiro's Ice Path, so you'll need to do a little bit of guesswork before casting the spell, but thankfully, the rest of Myrmidon's kit can slow enemies down, so you can catch them more easily. His second spell is Magic Carp. This targets an area on the ground and sends out magical fish friends to chase down every enemy in the initial cast range. Once a fish catches up to its target, it'll deal magic damage. If an enemy is standing still while this happens, they'll be slowed by 30% for 0.6 seconds. If they happen to be moving, however, they'll suffer a debilitating 2.5 second stun. This spell has a highly distinctive mechanic that plays with the enemy's natural instinct. If someone sees a projectile coming their way, the knee-jerk reaction is to get the hell out of there, but if they do, they'll be punished. It's not hard to dodge in theory. All you have to do is press S when the carp gets near, but there's a chance that Myrmidon might be able to throw down a weed field to catch you. Whatever the case, this spell is sure to terrorize anyone on the receiving end. Skill number 3 is Waveform. This has Myrmidon surge to a target location, slowing and reducing the magic armor of any enemy he passes through. Nothing too complex here. This is just a way for Myrmidon to engage on a target, as the reduced magic armor and movement speed from the spell amplifies his other basic abilities, while also making it easier to land Weed Field. Of course, this is all the more better when you learn about his ultimate, Forced Evolution. This transforms Myrmidon for 20 seconds, increasing his max health and magic armor, while changing his attack type to melee. His attacks will also deal a base amount of magic damage, with some scaling based on his attack damage. And just for good measure, they'll also slow the movement speed of his targets. Highly unexpected, at least for me, this ultimate turns Myrmidon into a frontline fighter, utilizing waveform to get close to the enemy, and unleashing a series of slows and stuns while in the middle of a brawl. It seems counterintuitive given how the rest of his abilities really seem more geared towards a backline utility player, but it's a welcome change of pace from your typical intelligence hero. With the Staff of the Masters, his ultimate is renamed to Mutant Evolution, and turns it into a toggle ability, giving yourself on-demand bulk whenever necessary. This additionally makes your attacks do splash damage, so it could also be used to farm faster in the late game and deal more DPS in a team fight. I do want to take a moment here to point out that Myrmidon has a few Pokemon references embedded into his character, the most notable being the name of Magikarp, which is a homophone for everyone's favorite useless fish. The skill description even says, Magikarp, use Splash, the name of its signature move. The description for his ultimate also says, what? Myrmidon is evolving, the same prompt given when a Pokemon on your team has hit an evolution requirement. The final icing on the cake here is a voice line in which Myrmidon says,
It's super effective,
which reads out when a Pokemon lands a type-advantaged move onto an opponent. Myrmidon's kind of weird in the sense that he plays very much like a traditional support, but needs some survivability for when the time comes to pop his ult. Power Supply, Plated Greaves, and the best item in the game, Gnome's Wisdom, are all useful as core items to pull off this strategy. All of them give a decent amount of stats and armor, while Gnome's Wisdom can grant a shield based on the mana that he uses, so it's highly valuable for when he's ready to dive deep into the enemy's ranks. For a late game solution, you're pretty much looking at either Frostfield Plate to add onto his survivability and slow potential, or Coldra Sheepstick because it's always a good item if you can pick it up. Myrmidon was always an interesting hero to me since he seems like he would fit well in the Dota roster, but manages to introduce some unique mechanics in the form of Magikarp and Forced Evolution. His overall hero design is really strong too, and I like how it focuses on slows while still being different from other heroes like Venomancer or Viper. In the hands of the right player, Myrmidon's potential can easily be off the scales. Last but not least, I've pulled a few strings to talk to you about Puppet Master. Puppet Master is a ranged intelligence hero who can dish out heavy damage while also disrupting the hell out of his opponents. The character is an older man with druid-like clothing, and a very prominent prop in the form of his marionette that he dances around across the battlefield. The lore rightly points out the unnerving nature of the hero. Although all the daemons of the Hellborn ranks are terrifying, few deserve to be called creepy. Yet that is the best word for the Puppet Master, whose smirks and gibbers and cackles of glee bespeak not just the specter of death, but something worse. His puppets are offenses to life, either false things imbued with stolen life, or living things twisted to his will. His voice work is surprisingly not too shabby. He's depicted as a devious creature who sees his enemies as toys, and is more than eager to play around with them.
The master is at your service. My puppet is ready. We will toy with them. The show must go on. We shall make them dance.
The first of the Master's abilities is Puppeteer's Hold. This targets an enemy and binds them with puppet strings for 4.5 seconds. The target is constantly pulled toward the position where the spell was applied, and if they move too far from the location, they'll be forced back to the original position. A very different form of crowd control from your typical affair, this does keep a unit in place, but they can retaliate, although the natural instinct would be to run away from you. It's best used in the early game with a few allies to pick somebody off, but after you pick up some damage items in the late game, you can easily dispatch single enemies on your own. Puppet Master's second ability is Puppet Show. This targets an enemy unit, causing them to go into a frenzy for 3.5 seconds. The afflicted unit will attack the nearest unit to them, friend or foe, though it will prioritize enemy heroes and creeps first. The damage that they do is non-lethal, so it's more so used to set up for a kill, especially when combined with Puppeteer's Hold. The obvious use would be to cast this on an enemy carry, and hope that they can dish out big damage on their own support. But in a pinch, you're pretty much disabling someone for a decent amount of time, so whatever you want to do with it, you'll end up in a good spot either way. The serial killing string puller's third skill is a passive called Whiplash. This skill starts off with 4 charges, and every time Puppeteer attacks, 1 charge is removed. Waiting 6 seconds without attacking will also remove a charge. When he has only 1 charge left, the next attack that he does will deal an additional 2.25 times critical strike, and do 100% of his attack damage in a splash radius of 150, which will also reset the charge counter to 4. This spell is a good way to do a lot of extra damage in the laning phase, whether you're playing carry or support. It does encourage high attack speed builds for carry puppet masters, as they'll want to get the crit off as much as possible while they're holding someone down with their other 2 basic spells. Being that he has one of the higher attack ranges in the game at 575, he'll be able to get a few procs of this off from a safe distance while in a team fight, and hopefully inflict some splash damage as a bonus. The Puppet Master's ultimate is Voodoo Puppet. This passively grants attack speed, and can target an enemy hero to create a voodoo doll where they were affected. The doll spawns with 1000 HP, and will transfer any damage it takes to the linked unit. The puppet itself can be attacked by Puppet Master and any of his allies, and the damage the enemy takes as a result is treated as magic damage. Moreover, Puppeteer's Hold and Puppet Show will affect the linked unit if cast on the voodoo doll, and all debuffs and stuns are transferred to the linked target as well. The effect will end once the puppet is destroyed, or if the target moves more than 1500 units away from it. While the main purpose of Puppet Master's ultimate is to deal damage to a target from a safe distance, it can also be used as a deterrent, persuading an enemy to run away from a team fight rather than stick around and take all the damage. It's also a good tool for catching any runaway enemies. If they happen to run into the trees, you can cast a spell on them at the very last moment to continue hurting them without getting crossed up in the fog of war. By picking up a Staff of the Masters, this changes the name of Voodoo Puppet to Voodoo Puppet with an asterisk. And much like the name change, this upgrade is one of the more boring ones, where the only differences are the damage dealt and the leash range. But if you're having one of those really good games and you don't know what to spend your big heaps of gold on, this ain't a bad way to go. Definitely leaning more into the hard carry side, Puppet Master thrives the most when he has enough attack speed to maximize his DPS with Whiplash. As far as core items go, you'll want Elder Parasite for that huge attack speed burst, as well as Assassin's Shroud to surprise enemies, as the Whiplash charges will go down by the time you gank someone. In the late game, Hellflower not only gives you all the stats you could possibly want, but also an on-demand silence in case your target wants to fight back. A Savage Mace can also be a good pickup to really drive the point home with even more DPS. I've really got to stress the importance of magic immunity here, so a Shrunken Head is going to be your best friend, as you'll surely be the target of many crowd control spells in the late game. The Puppet Master is a hero with whom I struggled a lot with and against. Being fairly new to MOBAs at the time, I didn't understand the importance of positioning or item builds, so most of the time, I got demolished when picking Puppet Master, but I'd get absolutely pummeled whenever I played against one. It's only now with over 13 years of MOBA experience crammed into my head that Puppet Master's kit seems so obvious, and it's kind of a shame that I won't get to redeem myself with him. No matter what happens, this Puppet Apprentice will always hold the Puppet Master in high regard, no strings attached. And those were some of Heroes of Newerth's fun original heroes. I honestly think that there's some good design to these characters, but what do you think? Who should I cover next? In the meantime, follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Twitch. Support the channel through joining as a member or donating on Patreon. And as always, I'll see you soon.